A village is in danger, and their only hope is a mysterious wolf lurking in the shadows. Will the wolf rise to the challenge? Watch to find out in this captivating story. The village of Kestrel Hollow sat like a forgotten thought pressed into the shoulders of the northern ridge, its stone homes hunched low against the wind, roofs thick with moss and memories. Most maps didn't bother marking it anymore. The highway had stopped 20 miles before its border, and the nearest train station was abandoned when Ellen was 10. No one came to Kestrel Hollow unless they meant to. No one left without carrying something of it with them, whether they wanted to or not. In early October, when the trees began to drip gold from their spines and the first hint of frost kissed the well buckets in the morning, Ellen came back. She hadn't wanted to. The city had offered her brightness, anonymity, the illusion of progress. But the letter from the village postmaster had been written in her grandfather's crooked hand, every other word leaning left like it was falling over. "Ellen, it's time," it said. "The mountain's talking again. I can't keep up." So she packed 2 bags, boarded 3 buses, and hitchhiked the rest with a fruit delivery van headed that way. By the time she stepped onto the crunching gravel at the edge of Kestrel Hollow, the air already smelled like snow. Her grandfather, Eirik, stood on the porch of the house that had once belonged to generations of Thorsons. He looked smaller than she remembered, less legend, more man. His hands trembled when he pulled her into a hug, but his eyes still had the sharp glint of the old hunter's instinct. "Didn't think you'd really come," he said. "I didn't either," Ellen replied. She unpacked slowly. The attic room had been untouched, the window frosted at the corners, the quilt still folded tight on the cedar chest. From that high window, she could see the tree line, where the pine grew dense and dark and too tall for light to settle. She remembered staring at that same view as a child, daring herself to find shapes in the shadows. Once, she swore she saw eyes. By the 3rd week of her return, the mountain had started changing. Birds vanished first. One morning, the sky was silent, no dawn song, no flurry of wings. Just the wind. The old dogs in the village howled more than usual, whining at doors, refusing to sleep. It was on the 4th Monday after the frost set in that someone saw the wolf. Mikkel, the butcher's son, had taken his traplines out early that day, trying to get ahead of the snowstorm that threatened the horizon. He came back white-faced, dragging his sled behind him empty. "Saw it on the east ridge," he said breathlessly, standing in the middle of the tavern where the elders gathered for their morning coffee and silence. "Massive. Scar over the right eye. Just watching." Everyone stopped. Some muttered prayers. Others scoffed. "There haven't been wolves here in 20 years, grunted Tomas, the blacksmith. "Probably a coyote." "No," Mikkel insisted. "Not a coyote. It just stood there. Didn't run. Didn't blink." Eirik was quiet for a long moment before setting down his coffee. "The hollow had a pact," he said at last. "Long ago. Before your fathers were born." They all turned toward him. The Watcher used to walk the ridges in winter. One among the pack, but not of it. They came when the storms did. Never harmed us unless we crossed a line. "And what line is that?" someone asked. "No one ever figured that part out," he said. That night, Ellen stood on the back porch and listened. Nothing moved, but the trees felt closer somehow, like they were listening too. By November, the fear had begun to fester. Small livestock vanished. A few sheep. 1 goat. No blood, no mess, just gone. Tracks appeared in the snow outside barns, too large for foxes, too quiet for dogs. A few younger men petitioned the council to authorize a hunt. "Kill it before it kills us," they said. Ellen listened to them argue beneath the old church bell tower, wrapped in her grandfather's wool coat, arms folded. She hadn't said much since she arrived. The village didn't ask for her opinion. She was young, and she had left. That was enough. But when they turned to Eirik and asked him to lead the hunt, the old man shook his head. No, no, Tomas repeated. You're the one who taught us to track. If there's a threat. If it's watching, Eirik said, it hasn't struck. Not really. Something's off. We don't move until we understand. That night, a fox was found dead just outside the schoolhouse. Not ripped apart, but laid flat, its eyes open, its body untouched. As if it had simply stopped. The children whispered about ghosts. The adults whispered about worse. Ellen sat beside the fireplace, her grandfather wheezing lightly in his armchair. She watched the logs crack and pop, the way the light danced across the old rifle that sat untouched above the mantel. "Why did you write to me?" she asked finally. He didn't open his eyes. "Because this place remembers you. And it needs someone who remembers it back. I don't believe in legends." "Neither does the mountain," he replied. "But it doesn't care if you do." That night, Ellen dreamt of the ridge. Of snow falling so thick it erased everything, and a shadow moving through it, slow, deliberate, massive. She woke with a start, heart pounding, fingers clutched around her blanket like it was a lifeline. The first snow came early. It wasn't gentle. A shrieking wind carved down from the peaks, flattening the treetops, tearing shingles from roofs. The snowfall was so dense that visibility dropped to feet. It howled for 2 straight days. When it finally broke, everything was white. Buried. The road out was gone. They had become an island of breath in a sea of ice. Generators ran at half capacity. The food store in the communal cellar would last a few weeks, maybe. Longer if they rationed. But the old couldn't chop wood, and the young didn't know how. Ellen stepped in, not with authority, but necessity. She organized shifts, bundled children together for warmth, and knocked on every door with a checklist and a flashlight. Eirik tried to help, but the cold hit his lungs too hard. On the 3rd night, he coughed blood into a rag. He smiled through cracked lips. "Told you the mountain was waking. The village doctor could do little." That same night, while wrapping extra cloth around the windows, Ellen saw it. Across the field, standing at the tree line, just past the curve of the barn, under the moonlight so faint it looked painted on, the wolf. It was tall, alone, perfectly still. Its eyes didn't glow, but they held something. Recognition? Intelligence? Memory? It didn't move. Neither did she. She stood in the snow, her breath visible, heart thudding. The wind had gone still. Everything waited. Then the wolf turned and disappeared back into the forest. She didn't tell anyone. In the morning, she went to the shed, found the rifle, and checked it. Still loaded. Still cold. Still old. She placed it back on the mantel. Something deeper than instinct told her, that isn't what this is for. The storm hadn't passed. It had only begun. But the ridge no longer felt empty. And for the first time in years, Kestrel Hollow would not be facing the mountain alone. By the time the second storm hit, the snow had already drowned fences and forgotten where roads had once been. The landscape was blank and endless. Windows became portholes to another world, one ruled by silence and white. Nothing stirred. Even the crows had stopped calling. Ellen had not slept through the night in 6 days. The village had settled into a rhythm of quiet desperation. They rationed by firelight, cooked over propane when it worked, and rotated night watches. not to defend against men, but against cold, wolves, and what no one dared name aloud. The council no longer met in the chapel hall. They sat around Ellen's table, sipping broth and whispering predictions. "We've got 2 weeks left of wood, maybe 3 if we stop heating the school," said Fry, the youngest of the elders, his fingers mottled from frostbite. "And half the heating oil froze in the tanks." "I counted 4 empty shelves in the cellar this morning," muttered Clara, the midwife. "If this keeps up, we'll be boiling bark and praying." Ellen said nothing. She just stared at the flickering firelight, her hand wrapped around a chipped mug, mind echoing with a question none of them voiced. Would we survive this winter? That night, the power flickered once. Then it died. No warning. No apology. Just darkness swallowing the hum of survival. There was no time to panic. Everyone already knew what it meant. The snow muffled everything. When people screamed, it sounded far away. When someone cried, the wind carried it elsewhere. The child was 5, Carrie, Mickle's niece. She'd gone out during a whiteout to look for her dog. No one noticed until the storm had passed, and her tracks were half swallowed by drifts. A search party was organized by lantern light, each of them tied to one another by rope. Ellen went. She always did. The cold bit her face like it was trying to peel her. The storm had left jagged ice ridges where there used to be meadows. It was like wandering inside a dead giant's lungs. They searched for hours. Voices broke the silence. They found her curled into a hollow in the snow, lips blue, boots missing. She was barely breathing. And beside her, pressed into the snow like a sentinel, were paw prints, circling her. Huge, unmistakable. Not fresh, but not yet softened by wind. Not one of them spoke as they carried her home. That night, around the fire, Fry whispered what everyone thought. The wolf protected her. Tomas stood and left the room. In the days that followed, something shifted. No more livestock disappeared. Instead, a carcass appeared. A deer, neatly skinned by fang and claw, laid outside the northern gate as if offered. It was fresh. Still warm. No trail leading to it, no blood smeared across the snow. Just there. No one wanted to touch it. Ellen did. She dragged it to the smokehouse, hands trembling not from the cold, but from the knowing. She didn't say it aloud, but when her eyes met Clara's, there was an understanding. Later that night, Ellen stood behind the barn with a bowl of dried meat and placed it beneath the old cedar at the edge of the wood. She didn't pray. She didn't bow. She just left it and walked away. In the morning, the bowl was empty. The snow was undisturbed. The village was quiet in a different way now. Not panicked, but waiting, listening, as if the woods breathed just behind the tree line. Children stopped fearing the dark. They watched the woods with wide eyes. A few of them whispered stories of how the wolf walked beside them on their way to the outhouse and kept the wind away. Adults pretended not to hear. Ellen didn't argue. Her grandfather had gotten worse. The cold had sunk into his lungs. When she sat beside him at night, he would wheeze between breaths, sometimes muttering fragments of old stories from his childhood. Once, in the silence between his coughs, he rasped, "He's come back, just like before." "Who?" she whispered. "The Hollow's keeper," he breathed. "We forgot the price of silence." Ellen didn't ask again. On the 12th night, something howled. Not in hunger. Not in pain. It was long and deep, echoing off the cliffs, curling through chimneys, threading into dreams. No one slept soundly. The next morning, the village dog was gone, tether snapped, bowl untouched. Later that day, Fry found the dog a mile away, limping but alive, blood on its fur not its own. Beside it, a trail led deeper into the forest. Drag marks, broken branches, signs of something larger having been there. Ellen didn't follow it. She stood at the edge of the woods, feeling the wind scrape across her cheeks, and spoke softly into the trees. "We see you," she said. That evening, the old radio crackled. For the first time in weeks, static became sound. The postmaster tuned the dial slowly, gently, like he was turning a knife in a wound. Emergency weather bulletin, repeat. Mountain villages remain cut off, helicopters unable to approach due to visibility. Stand by. The message looped every hour. They were still alone. That night, Ellen had another dream. She stood in the snow, barefoot, under a blood-orange moon. The wolf was there again. But this time, it was not silent. It looked at her, eyes like burning coals in a dying hearth, and she felt something unspoken pass between them. When she woke, the window frost had taken the shape of claw marks. She rose before dawn, heart pounding with a direction she didn't yet understand. The snow hadn't let up, but something else had begun. Trust. Fragile, trembling trust. The old rules of the hollow were whispering back into life. Not through tradition. Not through councils or rifles or stories. But through action. Through hunger shared. Through life saved. They didn't put it into words. They didn't hold meetings or write it down. But the village had begun to watch the woods not with fear, but with hope. The fever came with the thaw, but not the kind that brought comfort. It moved through the children first, quietly at first, like a cough behind a scarf. Then came the sweating, the burning skin, the vacant eyes that stared at the rafters as if they saw shapes in the woodgrain. By the time the second child fell ill, the chapel had been turned into an infirmary. By the third, the cellar became a storage for blankets soaked in vinegar and prayers. Ellen didn't panic. She didn't have time to. She moved like the storm had taught her, steady, without waste, without apology. Her coat was always half done, her gloves worn thin at the fingers. She checked pulses, counted pills, split rations. At night, when the other adults rested in shifts, she sat by the children and whispered stories that her grandfather once told her when she was feverish. Stories of a mountain that walked, of rivers that healed if you sang the right song, of a wolf that guarded those who remembered the old ways. By the fourth night, they ran out of penicillin. Clara counted supplies twice. "We don't have enough," she whispered. "If another one gets sick." Ellen didn't finish the sentence. Her eyes drifted to the ridge. No helicopters had come. The sky remained locked in gray. The roads were buried still. The radios crackled with stale loops and silence. The village, once more, became an island. But this time, something was different. They weren't alone. That morning, Ellen retrieved her grandfather's journal. His hands could no longer hold a pen, but decades of notes filled the pages, tracking seasons, animal migrations, and old sled routes once used to bring down firewood from the northern peaks. In the margins were small marks, tiny drawings of paws, compass roses, scratches that looked like howls in ink. She found what she was looking for on page 143, Foxbridge Pass, usable in thin snow years. Dangerous. Steep drop. Winds like teeth. But fastest way to Valley Clinic. She traced the route with her finger. 7 miles. Through the woods. Along the ridge. Past the hollow where the ice never melted. No one had used it in decades. But it was that or nothing. Clara said no. Tomas threatened to lock the gates. Mikkel shouted. Fry cursed at the wind like it owed them something. Ellen ignored them all. She left before sunrise, taking only what she could carry: 3 vials of the fevered children's blood, a flare gun, a piece of her grandfather's scarf, and a compass too old to trust. The storm hadn't lifted, but it had softened into a mournful wind that cried along the tree trunks. Snow came down in dry sheets like sifted flour. Her boots cracked ice with each step, the ridgeline barely a shadow in the fog. She walked. She fell twice. She bled from her palm where the ice bit too deep, and the slope gave way beneath her. When she finally collapsed against a cedar stump, the wind was howling again, loud and high and ceaseless. Her body shivered in waves. Her eyelids sank heavy. She thought she saw her grandfather kneeling beside her, wrapping her shoulders with the old wolfskin cloak he wore in her childhood. But then she opened her eyes, and it wasn't him. It was the wolf, standing not 6 feet away. It made no sound. Its breath plumed thick into the cold air. Its eyes, those same ember eyes, studied her not with pity, but with something closer to judgment. It did not move forward. Instead, it turned its head and stepped away. Ellen blinked. The wolf looked back, then walked again. Not away. Forward. Into the white. Ellen rose. She followed. The wind cut them both. The snow lashed at her face like glass dust. The wolf didn't slow. It moved in long strides, certain, purposeful. Twice, it stopped at crossings where ridges collapsed into ice shelves. It waited for her to find her footing before continuing. When she stumbled, it circled back. When she wept once, silently, wiping her face with a torn glove, it stopped and stood still until she did too. They reached the far side of the pass at dusk. And then, just like that, the wolf was gone. She turned once and caught a glimpse of its tail disappearing behind a granite outcropping. She tried to whisper thank you, but her throat was too dry. She descended the slope alone. By morning, she was pounding on the service door of the Valley Clinic with bloodless fingers. When she returned 3 days later with a snowmobile and the medication, the children were still alive. Not well, but breathing. Ellen didn't tell the council what happened. She didn't need to. Fry had found the trail, unmistakable wolf tracks, pacing like a shepherd through the storm. "They say you're lucky," Clara said, handing her tea. "But luck doesn't leave footprints." Her grandfather passed that night. Quietly. Before he went, Ellen sat beside him and whispered, "I followed your path." He opened one eye. "Did he guide you?" Ellen nodded. The old man smiled and closed his eye for the last time. The next morning, Ellen left a slice of fresh venison under the cedar tree. The next morning, it was gone. No prints. Just melted snow. The council no longer spoke of hunting. Children were taught to leave a bite of bread on the window ledge at night. Not out of fear, but respect. Stories began to return, like moss after fire. Tomas carved a new totem for the chapel post, a wolf, crouched low in vigilance. Clara stitched a patch onto the village flag, a silver paw. No vote was held. The pact wasn't signed. It was felt. That spring, when the bear came down from the ridge, crazed with hunger, ribcage like knives and teeth chipped from stone, it charged straight through the lower fence and into the goat shed. Panic followed. Ellen grabbed the flare gun. Others screamed. But they didn't need it. They heard the fight from the ridge. The snarling. The snapping. The brutal, sharp end. They found the bear's body the next morning, 20 yards from the village. Its neck had been broken. Its throat torn. No wolf tracks surrounded it. Just one. One pair of massive paws. And a tuft of silver for snagged on a broken fence post. They buried the bear. but not before placing a stone beside it. On the stone, someone carved, "Not all wild teeth bite the hand." And from that day on, no child ever feared the howl. The thaw came slow, like breath returning to a body that had almost forgotten how to breathe. It began not with green, but with sound, a steady dripping from the eaves, the creak of trees shaking off their coats of ice, the distant groan of the mountain shifting under the weight of retreating snow. The village of Kestrel Hollow emerged inch by inch. Icicles broke like glass onto frozen porches. Smoke thinned above chimneys that had burned for months straight. Doors opened not just for ration checks or emergency calls, but for the simple miracle of stepping outside without the sting of wind tearing at the skin. When the first bird sang again, just one note, uncertain and thin, Ellen was hanging blankets on a line, and she stopped mid-clip, eyes wet, breath caught in her chest. She smiled without meaning to. The hollow had survived, but not unchanged. The children who had burned with fever now walked again, paler and thinner, but holding hands as they stepped over the ice-scabbed earth like they were meeting it for the first time. The council, once split by doubt and fear, now moved with a shared quietness, as if the silence that had saved them deserved to linger a little longer. No one asked when the wolf would come again. They no longer spoke of it as a question. They simply waited. A week after the melt began, a radio team arrived from the valley. A convoy of snowplows cleared the final stretch of the abandoned road. A man with a clipboard and a microphone asked questions. A drone buzzed overhead. Ellen met them at the chapel gate, boots muddy with thaw, arms folded. "We heard there was a heroic rescue," the journalist said, smiling too widely. "A local girl made a run through the storm to save the sick kids." "Is that you?" She nodded. He clicked his pen eagerly. "Any help along the way?" Ellen paused. "I had a guide." "Another villager?" She tilted her head. "No, not exactly." The article the next day called it "The Miracle of Kestrel Hollow." The photos showed the children wrapped in blankets, smiling beside wood-stacked cabins. They wrote about community, about grit, about human resilience. There was no mention of what really mattered. That was fine. Not everything needed to be printed to be true. On the night the roads were declared officially clear, the village gathered for the first proper meal in months. There was meat again, and potatoes, and even a jar of honey someone had saved for when it finally ended. They lit lanterns and lined them along the snowbanks like stars guiding the lost home. Ellen sat alone by the old cedar, a plate balanced on her lap, her grandfather's scarf wrapped tight around her shoulders. She didn't eat. She listened. And then, soft, distant, and unmistakable, a howl rose from the ridge. Not mournful. Not angry. Full. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, she saw it. Just for a moment. Just between the trees. The silhouette. Broad shoulders. Heavy coat. Head held high. He didn't move forward. He never had. He simply stood there, as if to say, "You're safe now." Then he turned and disappeared. Ellen stayed there until the stars burned overhead, until her fingers went numb around the plate she never touched. The next morning, she climbed the ridge. Alone. There were no paw prints in the snow. No claw marks. No fur snagged on bark. But she found something else. A hollow beneath a twisted spruce, half hidden by fallen branches. Bones. Feathers. The remnants of meals. A shallow bed of dry pine. And in the center, a single smooth stone with a scratch across its surface. Like a mark. Like a memory. She took nothing. She just sat there for a while, knees tucked to her chest, listening to the wind move through the trees. When she returned, she didn't speak of it. Instead, She asked Clara for paints. Within a week, the children were climbing ladders to help. The side of the chapel was turned into a mural, 30 feet wide and 12 feet high. On one side, a snowstorm, swirling and bright. In the middle, a girl walking forward, hand outstretched, scarf trailing behind her. And beside her, nearly twice her size, the outline of a wolf. Its head was turned toward her, its body made of wind and frost and starlight. When it was done, no one signed it. But every morning, the children laid bits of bread at the foot of the wall. A month passed. Spring reached even the high slopes. Crocuses pushed through old snow. Meltwater streamed through gullies like veins returning to the land. One morning, Mikkel's youngest son came running into the square, breathless and wild-eyed. "Tracks," he gasped. "Little ones. By the ridge." No one said a word. No one needed to. Ellen followed the boy to the spot, her boots sinking into the slush. The prints were there, smaller than before. Still deep, but less heavy. Paw prints. 4. Then 5. A pup, maybe 2. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just closed her eyes and pressed her hand into the snow beside the print, fingers splayed, like sealing a pact. That night, she wrote it all down. Everything. The fever. The pact. The old stories. The deer. The hollow. The guide. She didn't call it a story. She called it memory. When she was done, she placed the notebook beside her grandfather's rifle on the mantel. Outside, the trees whispered again. And high above the village, lit by the moon and framed in stars, a lone howl rose, and was answered. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories of resilience, connection, and the wild spirits that walk among us.